129 men had steam engines, heated ships, and 3 years of food. They all froze to death. Meanwhile, a few miles away, people living in houses made of snow were warm. The ships were called HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. They were the most advanced vessels the British Empire had ever sent into the Arctic. Iron-reinforced hulls, steam engines, thousands of pounds of preserved food. Everything a human being could need to survive the cold. They carried books, silverware, fine china, even musical instruments, because no one believed this journey would fail. Not like this. When they disappeared, search parties went north. They expected to find wreckage, or at least a message, something that made sense. Instead, they found boots, scattered along a frozen shoreline on King William Island, worn through, salt-cracked, rotting. The kind of boots that had walked a very long way, after everything else was already gone. There were no survivors. Not one. 129 men gone. And for a long time, the explanation seemed obvious. The Arctic was too cold, too extreme, too unforgiving for any human system to survive. That was the conclusion. It made sense. It felt right. Until you looked closer. Because they were not alone up there. Not even close. There were people living in that same environment, not passing through it, not exploring it. Living, raising families, sleeping through the same nights that killed those sailors. They had no steam engines, no metal ships, no preserved food, no factories behind them. What they had was something far more dangerous to ignore. They were comfortable, inside structures made of snow. At temperatures that could kill a man in minutes, they slept, ate, and lived normally. No panic, no desperation, no slow collapse. Just life. That is the part this story is actually about. Not how 129 men died, but how, right next to them, another group of people had already solved the problem completely. And no one was listening. For a long time, the conclusion never changed. The Arctic was too extreme, too cold, too hostile for permanent human life. And the people who lived there? They were described as lucky, primitive, barely surviving. That story was easy to believe, because it made everything else make sense. If the environment was impossible, then failure was expected. But that assumption was wrong. Not slightly wrong, completely wrong. The people of the Arctic were not surviving by accident. They were operating inside a system they understood perfectly. And the center of that system looked like nothing. From the outside, it was just a mound of snow, roughly 12 feet across, 6 feet high. No windows, no chimney, no visible structure at all. Just a smooth dome sitting in the middle of an empty white landscape. If you didn't know what you were looking at, you would walk right past it. But inside that mound, something impossible was happening. When the temperature outside dropped to -50, inside, it stayed above freezing. Let that settle. A difference of over 100 degrees, maintained with no furnace, no insulation materials, no modern technology. Just snow. And a flame no bigger than a candle. The entrance wasn't a door, it was a tunnel. Low, narrow, curving upward before it opened into the main space. That detail mattered, because cold air is heavy. It sinks. So when the outside air pushed into the tunnel, it dropped to the lowest point and stayed there. It never reached the living space. Inside the dome, everything was built around that same idea. Warm air rises, cold air sinks. So the sleeping platform was raised. Just a foot, but enough. Enough to keep human bodies in the warmest layer of air. The walls weren't just barriers. They were part of the system. Snow traps air. Tiny pockets locked inside its structure. And air, when it cannot move, holds heat. So the walls didn't just block the cold. They slowed it, controlled it. And inside that control, heat could finally stay. Not much heat, just enough. Body heat, breath, and the small, steady flame of an oil lamp. A single flame holding back an entire Arctic night. To someone used to central heating, it looks impossible. It looks like not enough. But that is the mistake. Because the system was never about producing more heat. It was about never letting it escape. The flame was small, smaller than most people would trust. No roar, no crackling fire, just a thin line of light stretching across a shallow stone bowl. To someone seeing it for the first time, it would feel like a mistake. Not enough heat, not enough power, not enough anything. But inside that dome of snow, it was enough. Because the flame was not working alone. The structure held the heat. The air kept it still. And the system did the rest. The lamp was made from stone, carved into a crescent shape, filled with rendered animal fat. A wick made from moss laid carefully along the edge. When it burned, it didn't flare. It didn't flicker wildly. It stayed steady, controlled. Because too much flame would waste fuel. Too little would let the cold creep back in. Everything about it had to be precise. The angle of the wick, the level of the oil, the way the flame touched the air. It was not just lighting. It was a heating system. And like any system, it required skill to operate. Nearby, a woman adjusted the wick, not by guessing, not by measuring, by feel. She watched the color of the flame, the way it moved, the way the heat settled in the space. A slight change, and the entire temperature of the dome shifted. Too much smoke, and the air would fill with particles, damaging lungs, burning eyes. Too little heat, and the temperature would fall. Slowly at first, then all at once. There was no margin for error. And yet, they made it look effortless. Because this knowledge was not written down. It was learned, passed from one generation to the next, not as theory, but as practice. Something your hands understood before your mind did. And the lamp was only one part of it, because the heat it produced had to go somewhere. Into the air, into the walls, into the bodies that generated even more of it, which meant the human body itself was part of the system. And that changed everything. Because survival in that environment was not just about shelter. It was about fuel. Not fuel for fire. Fuel for the body. The people living there did not eat the way outsiders expected. They didn't chase balance. They didn't count nutrients. They ate what worked. And what worked was fat. Dense. Heavy, packed with energy. Because in that cold, your body is always burning, always producing heat just to stay alive. Thousands of calories every single day. And without that fuel, no shelter, no clothing, no system would matter. Which is why nothing was wasted. The animal that provided food also provided heat. Its fat burned in the lamp. Its skin became clothing. Its fur insulated the body. Every part feeding into the same system. Closed. Efficient. Complete. From the outside, it looked simple, primitive even. But inside, it was something else entirely. A level of precision that most people never saw, because they never looked close enough. And when they didn't understand it, they dismissed it. And when they dismissed it, they missed the only thing that could have saved them. If you looked at their clothing from a distance, it didn't seem like much. Animal skins, fur, layered loosely over the body. To an outsider, it looked heavy, primitive, crude. But it wasn't. It was engineered. Not in a factory, not on paper, but over thousands of years of trial and error, where the cost of getting it wrong was death. The inner layer was worn with the fur facing inward, against the skin. Soft, dense, trapping warmth right where the body needed it. The outer layer was reversed, fur facing outward, creating space between the two layers. Not by accident. A controlled air pocket, because air, when it stays still, becomes insulation. Heat moved outward from the body into that space, and stayed there. Moisture moved the other direction, passing through the outer layer before it could freeze, before it could turn into ice inside the clothing. That detail mattered more than anything, because wet clothing in that environment is a death sentence. Even a small amount of trapped moisture can strip heat from the body faster than the cold outside. So the system had to do two things at the same time. Keep heat in, let moisture out. And it did, better than most modern gear. Hunters could move for hours in -40 conditions, not just surviving, working, breathing steadily, maintaining warmth, because the system was balanced. And that balance extended beyond clothing, beyond shelter, into everything. The way they built, the way they moved, the way they hunted. Nothing existed on its own. Everything fed into everything else. A closed loop. Energy taken in was energy preserved. Heat generated was heat kept. Loss was minimized at every step. This was not improvisation. It was mastery. And that is the part that kept getting missed, because from the outside, it didn't look like advancement. There were no machines, no metal systems, no visible complexity. So it was labeled as something lesser, something behind. But the truth was the opposite. It was a system so precisely matched to its environment that nothing unnecessary remained. No excess weight, no wasted energy, no weak points. And that is why, when the cold came, it did not destroy them. It didn't even disrupt them, because they were not fighting it. They had already solved it. For a long time, we told this story the wrong way. We said the Arctic was impossible, that it broke men, that it defeated even the most advanced technology. And in a way, that part is true. But it's not the whole truth. Because the real question was never, how do you fight the cold? The real question was, how do you live inside it? The men of the Franklin expedition brought everything they trusted. Machines, metal, food sealed in tin, systems built for a different world. And when those systems failed, they had nothing left. no backup, no understanding of what to do next. The people who lived there never had that problem, because they never depended on anything they didn't fully understand. Their shelter was built from the environment. Their clothing was shaped by it. Their food was designed for it. Everything they used belonged there, which meant when conditions changed, nothing broke. It adapted. That difference is everything. Because modern systems don't usually fail slowly. They fail all at once. The power goes out. The heat disappears. The pipes freeze. And suddenly, all the layers we rely on are gone. In February of 2021, millions of people in Texas lost power. They were inside their homes, in their beds, in their own rooms, and they froze. Not because the cold was stronger, but because the system they trusted stopped working. And in that silence, after everything shut down, the same question returned. The one that had already been answered centuries before. What do you do when the machine stops? The answer was never hidden. It was there the entire time, in the shape of a snow dome, in the structure of a coat, in the flame of a small oil lamp that never tried to overpower the cold, only to exist within it. This is not a story about the past. It's a reminder that survival is not about having more. It's about understanding what actually works and building your world so that when everything else fails, it still does.